Chapters 18 and 19 will have some mirrored language, showing that the biblical authors want us to see the portraits of Abraham and Lot side by side. So, the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent during the hottest time of the day. Back in chapter 13, we saw Abraham and Lot part ways because they couldn't stop arguing about their stuff. So Lot went toward lush Sodom because it looked good in his eyes, and Abram came to these oaks of Mamre, and Abraham is sitting at the door of his tent. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing across from him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. It's customary in this culture to be extremely polite and hospitable to travelers, but he also recognizes early on that this is actually an appearance of God. They aren't just men. It says there are 3 men, but Abraham says, "My Lord," singular, "if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by and leave your servant. Let a little water be brought so that you may all wash your feet and rest under the tree. And let me get a bit of food so that you may refresh yourselves, since you have passed by your servant's home. After that you may be on your way." He seems to know that this is some kind of divine visitation, and he's humbled to serve these men. "All right," they replied, "you may do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, "Quick, take 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread." Don't worry, he's not just barking orders at his wife. He's also going to prepare and serve food himself. He's running and hurrying in the heat. 3 measures or seahs of flour would be extravagant. Each seah is probably a little more than 7 liters, so this is about 21 liters of flour. That's 5.5 gallons if you live in the US, Liberia, or Myanmar. That would make way more bread than anyone needed. Maybe some other folks joined the feast, or maybe some of the bread was for the road, but Abraham was a generous servant. Our faith is exposed by how we treat people. Abraham knew that God is a giver. He knew that God provides abundance and flourishing. When people are stingy and cold, it shows that they have little to no faith. But Abraham has experienced the God who provides lavishly, and so his faith gets practical and he provides lavishly. Then, just in case the angels had a gluten intolerance, Abraham ran to the herd and chose a fine tender calf and gave it to a servant who quickly prepared it. Meat was a delicacy in ancient times, and notice Abraham took what was good, not to hoard for himself, but in order to give rest and refreshment to others. Abraham then took some curds and milk, along with the calf that had been prepared, and placed the food before them. They ate while he was standing near them under a tree. So there's blessing and communion with God. Then they asked him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Well, they must have known where she was, but they wanted to make sure she's included in this. Sarah's not just an afterthought. She's a valued covenant partner, and God has plans for her and her child. He replied, "There, in the tent." One of them said, "I will surely return to you when the season comes round again, and your wife Sarah will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, not far behind him. Abraham and Sarah were old and advancing in years. Sarah had long since passed menopause. Not only has she been barren, but she's also too old to produce a child. This womb is dead. So Sarah laughed to herself, thinking, "After I am worn out, will I have pleasure, especially when my husband is old too?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child when I am old?' Is anything impossible for the Lord?" When the men got up to leave, they looked out over Sodom. Now Abraham was walking with them to see them on their way. Abraham knows his nephew lives down there. He knows it's a wicked city. He doesn't know that God is preparing to bring judgment. Then the Lord said, "Should I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? After all, Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on the earth will pronounce blessings on one another using his name. I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Then the Lord will give to Abraham what he promised him. Since Abraham is going to be this great nation that influences other nations, then Abraham has to learn that God is just. He has to see God's justice." So the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sins so blatant that I must go down and see if they are as wicked as the outcry suggests. If not, I want to know." This word outcry is often used in the Hebrew Bible when people are being oppressed. Abel's blood cries from the ground. Israel cries out in Egypt. The orphan and the widow cry out in Exodus 22. It's not clear to me where this outcry is coming from. Maybe reports from travelers or people who had visited Sodom and Gomorrah were left for dead. Word gets around that this is really an awful, dangerous place. And notice, judgment has already been announced, so whatever happens in the next chapter can't be the sole reason for the destruction of Sodom. It's just one example. The 2 men turned and headed toward Sodom, but Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham approached, let that sink in. He approached God and said, "Will you sweep away the godly along with the wicked? What if there are 50 godly people in the city? Will you really wipe it out and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 godly people who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the godly with the wicked, treating the godly and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of the whole earth do what is right?" Now he's learning. Of course God will do what is right. He sees the whole picture. He hears the whole outcry. He knows what's going on. And he lets this guy walk right up to him and make a bargain. When the people of God pray, God listens. So the Lord replied, "If I find in the city of Sodom 50 godly people, I will spare the whole place for their sake." God is quick to have mercy, and it's fascinating that he interacts with his covenant family to pray boldly into action. What's so encouraging to me here is how the wicked can potentially benefit from the presence and the prayers of the righteous. God will work with us. Have you ever tried to reason with an angry person? Or maybe you've been the angry one that someone tries to reason with. But anger just overpowers everything. End of discussion. I'm not going to talk about it. Do you see how God is so refreshingly different? God's preparing to wipe out a city. Abraham says, "What about if we do it this way?" And God's like, "Okay, that's reasonable. I hear you. We can go that route." Then Abraham asked, "Since I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes, what if there are 5 less than the 50 godly people? Will you destroy the whole city because 5 are lacking?" Notice Abraham's posture. I'm just dust. I have absolutely no right to challenge God's justice, but I've heard about Sodom, and 50 sounds like a pretty tall order. He replied, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." Abraham is learning what God's like. He's bracing himself. He knows his place, but he's also finding that God's attitude toward prayer is, yes, I want to be merciful. Yes, I want to save. Yes, I want these cities to repent. And yes, I'm willing to work with you. Will humanity work with me? Abraham spoke to him again. "What if 40 are found there?" He replied, "I will not do it for the sake of the 40. Then Abraham said, "May the Lord not be angry so that I may speak. What if 30 are found there?" He replied, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." Abraham said, "Since I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 are found there?" He replied, "I will not destroy it for the sake of the 20. Finally, Abraham said, "May the Lord not be angry so that I may speak just one more. What if 10 are found there?" He replied, "I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. The Lord went on his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham. Then Abraham returned home. We're left to wonder what would happen if Abraham negotiated further. But evidently there weren't even 10 righteous people in the city. The judgment was inevitable. So what was it about Sodom that made them so bad? So far we've only seen very general descriptions of their sin. Chapter 13 said the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. In this chapter there's a reference to grievous sin that results in an outcry. Well, later in biblical history, the prophet Ezekiel confronts Jerusalem, and he says this, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them as you have seen." So that's more specific. As for some of those detestable behaviors, we'll get more gruesome detail in the next chapter when those 2 angels arrive in the city of sin. But judgment is already coming. God's justice will not fail.